Hello, everyone. This is episode 61 of the Just and False podcast, member of the Broken Jars Network, and today we are going into the depths of Lovecraft. I have no idea what I'm doing, but that might actually help me, considering it's Lovecraft.
It's going to protect your sanity, because otherwise you're going to have to start chanting, and then.
Oh boy! Well, in that case, I'm so safe.
Yeah, apparently. Andreas has already got his cultist robe on, so we're ready with that.
Man, you know how cold it is in Denmark?
No, I don't actually.
It's cold. Let's see, how cold is it actually? Let's check. It's cold.
Is it Antarctica cold?
-4 right now.
He checked the thermostat and it said it's fucking cold. So
-4.
Okay, Lovecraft. Yay!
Yeah.
So news, we were talking about news. Let's pretend we've got a format. So we're going to spoil fucking everything. We're also going to swear all the goddamn time, since I've sworn twice just telling you about it. So theoretically, if you haven't heard already, you can pre-order Briefcases, which we were just discussing has a unique story in it called Zoo Day, where they spend a day at the zoo. But we know that it's going to involve Harry and Maggie and Mouse's perspectives. So,
and if you're like me and haven't read any of the other short stories in it, you'll be excited.
Yay! Yeah. I'm just excited to hear Marsters voice them. So,
Marsters' voice for Mouse will be wonderful.
Dear God.
We already got it a little bit in changes though.
Oh yeah, but it's a whole section of a story.
Right. I want to know if he's just mad all the time or only when Leah's around. So is he going to bite anyone else's ass off during that? And the answer is probably.
Probably.
So, yeah. Okay, so Lovecraft. So we should probably have the extra warning here that the more that you listen to this podcast, the more crazy and insane you are going to become. So you've been warned.
And we will spoil all of Lovecraft too, just to be clear. We're spoiling everything. We're very literal about that.
Can you spoil something that's almost 100 years old?
Yes, because I only just finished Mountains of Madness like an hour ago.
Everyone interested in Jurassic
Park. I mean, I feel like even though I've never even touched the books or considered it, I got a fair amount of idea about Lovecraft because it's just in every pop culture thing.
Well, that's a true story.
A lot of modern horror.
Right. Yeah. So, he kind of was one of the next follow-ons from Poe, Lovecraft himself. Yeah, he just kind of inspired everything. Like we were talking, Stephen King references him, and Butcher, of course, references him, and that's what we're going to talk about. And he had spawned so many other offshoots that it just became known as the Cthulhu mythos, and even stuff he didn't necessarily directly write gets put into that mythos and everything. So we're going to spoil that. Just a fair warning that this is one of those burn before reading things. If you don't want to go nuts, eject the tape, put it in the fire, go on with your happy life, and when the sleeper awakens, he will eat your soul, and there's nothing you can do about it. So,
but you lived happily until that point.
You didn't know it was coming.
Ignorance is bliss. Okay, so Cthulhu stuff, right? The mythos. It's just kind of called the Cthulhu mythos to separate it out from everything else, but we were doing some research and taking a look at direct references, and then I wanted to talk about some things that I felt were close references. So again, spoilers. We're going to talk about things like At the Mouth of Madness, which I had the director read on purpose. And I wanted to also warn you that there's going to be spoilers about Warcry. We're going to talk about some other stories that mention things as well. So Outsiders, obviously, is one of the big ones. It's kind of hard to link this directly in the sense that Outsiders is just a general word, and a lot of people use it for a lot of things. But, in the mythos, it kind of becomes the catch-all word for everything, So, the Great Old Ones is usually what you reference as the Dark Gods. Like we were talking about Shub-Niggurath and Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu and everything like that.
Yeah, I knew one of those words.
Yeah, and you knew one of them sounded like a racial slur, as you brought up. But as we discussed, the color, it's
the black goat of the young, black goat of the woods with 1,000 young.
I feel like it's got to be on purpose, right?
Right. So we were kind of surprised or excited or both or everything like that. But Colin was discussing prior to the show, and we found that in Turncoat there is a reference to Shub Niggurath directly. So that was kind of cool because like I pulled the ones that were obvious that I've had just in the back of my mind forever. But there are definitely some incidental references or some one-liners that
what was the
probably overlooked. So for Shub Niggurath, it was something like it would give Shub Niggurath like nightmares.
It was something like there are things in this world that even the black goat with 1,000 young wouldn't dare use for its kids' bedtime stories.
Yes. So there you go.
When is that set?
Turncoat.
I don't remember which part, but I do remember it sticking out of my head that it was set.
According to Wikipedia, Turncoat. I'll go with it.
Right.
Who?
It was Dresden. Dresden said that directly, but I don't have a PDF copy of that one that I can just search and find it. But there you go.
I'll pull it up.
There's a reason I invited Colin.
Yeah, Colin.
Right. So
I only have it on Audible, so that would be pretty. Okay, let me just find it, guys. And like start scrolling through Audible.
Right. Yeah, so we've got the great old ones, which is, the dark gods usually, but also kind of interchangeably references some other things like the elder things and creatures that appear in at the Mountains of Madness, for example. But then there are a lot of Cthulhu references and a lot of mythos things that we haven't necessarily seen. So like specifically, we haven't necessarily seen elder things. We don't know if they're going to be like lumped in with the Fomor or if they exist at all. But that was one of the things we were talking about, that in Lovecraft, basically because the Earth is billions of years old, multiple different alien races have built civilizations here and everything like that. And I'm not sure Butcher's going to take it that far, but he's definitely referenced, directly some Lovecraft.
All right, I've got the direct reference.
Critters.
So Dresden's talking about using his sight. And he says, the sight can show you beauty that would make angels weep humble tears and terrors that would make the black goat with 1,000 young wouldn't dare use for its kids' bedtime stories.
So this is when he was looking at Shagnasty with his sight, I'm guessing?
Yeah, it's got to be. Yep.
So that's like
so
the
shortly
first
before he
thing,
saw
right?
it. Yeah, chapter 4.
Right. Yeah, that's like way early. Nice.
Do we think this is just a literary reference for Dresden, as in his world they have a Lovecraft too?
Well, he did directly
everything.
He did directly reference Lovecraft, at least and at the end of Cold Days, he was talking about what Sharkface was doing with the whole ritual, and why don't you just do a blah 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 Cthulhu Fatagan?
Right.
So it's like he's read the stories.
Right. Well, and that's the crazy part too, because also the Necronomicon is a literal book there that has actual power.
And it was specifically disseminated to weaken it. So
by the White Council.
Yes. Right.
So it has real power, and that implies a lot of things about Lovecraft, or at least some.
True. What are they called? Ones Thomas is a part of.
The Venatori?
Yeah, they really love that distribution.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering how that didn't backfire on the White Council.
Because as he describes it, since a lot of people are trying to make use of it, the power is depleted and it's not able to build up. So it's like you get tiny things happening, not big ones.
You're not going to wake up an old god accidentally doing that?
Apparently not. But what it sounds like is it's a little bit of, like bittersweet or, win-lose, because it was the White Council accomplished what they set out to do, which was water down the rituals, but it set the Venatori back in a huge way, I would imagine. So,
it kept that knowledge alive, even if it wasn't significant enough to actively bring about any kind of cataclysm.
The problem is once the cat's out of the bag, the way that the White Council did it, that, they keep sapping the power from it, basically. The way I imagine it, this might not actually be factually true in Dresden Files, but this is how I understand it, is that, they have to keep making sure that the Necronomicon gets referenced in pop culture, keep it in people's minds, so people keep trying to use it, so it keeps being depleted. If they ever stop doing that, and people, now it's more well known, but people stop doing it, then you'll have old god shit on your hands.
Isn't that still the idea of backup?
Kind of. And, I mean, because with the lexicon, right? The lexicon Malos and a similar other book there. The thing that gets me about it is it seems like you could still warn, say, the senior council members and say, hey, by the way, publishing these books is totally a dick move. We can't tell you why. Just fucking stop doing that. You know,
the organization is so secret that supposedly even though senior council don't know about them.
Right. Well, and that's that's kind of the thing.
And it's made out of both bad and good guys.
They would almost have to, though, because Lucio, for example, Wyatt Earp is like, hey, guess what? I'm Wyatt Earp and I'm a member of the Venatori. That took about 3 seconds. So,
but that's because there's more than one Venatori.
Yeah, there's the Venatori Umbrorum, and then there's like the true Venatori.
Hidden within the Venatori.
Yeah, the Umbrorum were set up by the Venatori.
They might not realize that there are layers, but I would be surprised that the senior council didn't know. Like,
I'm betting
even the
gatekeeper a member of the Venatori.
Yeah, exactly. I could definitely see some overlap there. Okay.
Someone.
So, since going off of the Necronomicon, they deliberately mentioned the mad Arab Al-Hazred in Dresden. I don't remember if it was in writing or I think it was actually a word of Jim that Rashid
is also supposed to be a factual person.
Yeah.
Right, that must have been a word of Jim because I don't remember that directly.
Yeah, I've got it linked in our research, so sorry.
Killed him. Which is very interesting. And it's supposed to be notable is that of Rashid's power level and stuff. So this was a person that in the Dresden universe wrote the Necronomicon and then got killed. And what does that make Lovecraft, the person?
Well, so...
This guy was a wizard. That Lovecraft is a writer.
Yeah, I'm surprised he hasn't had some reference to Lovecraft being some guy who knew too much.
Maybe he's a wizard.
Yet. Because I feel like Jim doesn't want to necessarily tip that hand just yet. Because, Colin and I discussed that we kind of feel like that's the end game and part of why we wanted to focus on this so much. But, Jim does have, Word of Jim out there that talks about how Lovecraft and Stoker were basically the same on, different levels and different pieces. Like H.P. Lovecraft knew too much and got him killed, I think is the literal, Word of Jim on that one. So
I don't remember that one. And Stoker was pushed into doing what he did by the White Court. Correct. So who would have done
White Court?
Yeah, it was the White Court, not the White Council. The White Court did it in order to get rid of the Black Court. Yeah. And that who would have done the pushing?
That's what Mavra says anyway. So if Mavra's information is correct, we don't know, but let's assume she knows what she's talking about. That's Mavra, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure every other vampire court would love the profusion of information that doesn't actually pertain to them.
But does kill the very dangerous ones.
The other ones.
So I'm going to paste the quote for you in the chat. But basically it says, in the Dresden verse so this is a question, in the Dresden verse was H.P. Lovecraft onto something like Bram Stoker, or was he just an author with a thing for odd adjectives? And the answer is he was onto something, and like Stoker, it got him killed. So,
I mean,
that's as far back as 2010. So that's an 8-year-old Q&A.
Is that before obviously before Cold Days?
Yeah,
I think it's before Turncoat because I thought Turncoat came out in 2011. So
I remember when books came out.
For anyone not too familiar with Lovecraft, the whole odd adjectives, there are a few standout words that I will never not disassociate with Lovecraft. Cyclopean.
Oh God,
non-Euclidean geometry comes up a lot at the Mountains of Madness.
Right.
I don't. Maybe it was just something in my copy of it, but every time he meant to use the word show, he spelled it as shoe, SHEW, and I just think, okay.
That might have been the time.
I don't know. I've never seen it used that way before, but he used Cyclopean like every other paragraph.
God. Yeah. He was an early pioneer, not a...
So the first thing you go crazy because you have to read the 100-year-old English, and then you go crazy because as you start to understand it chews away at your brain. But yeah.
I don't know if it's because I only ever read the translated version, and I don't know how much they modernized the language, but Dracula seemed very...
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be difficult to...
Translate
it, yeah. Like, I was reading some things from colonial America, and when they got the F's instead of the S's, and it's just like... I can just slowly go through this in my head, but it looks funny. But you can't translate that into a different language. It just
So if you read Dracula in English, the way it was written, it would be weird. Or how contemporary is it in its language use?
So
it's not terrible as far as I remember.
So with the Rashid thing, just to kind of tie that up, one of the things that I wanted to mention there was that the Mad Arab was actually far enough back in time that it seems like there are some time travel related shenanigans there, because Rashid would therefore theoretically be the oldest wizard on the council. So there have been some things that have discussed that possibly Rashid has been hiding out in the Never Never, or some other kinds of...
pictured the Mad Arab as being like late 1800s.
Oh, no, he had to have been much older than that. I thought he was like 1300s or something.
I think it's even earlier than that. So I'm pulling up the wiki just to confirm, but I thought he was like 600. So,
man. That's an interesting question.
August Derleth redacted his death to 731, so that's a lot earlier than I thought.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah, and it kind of depends, right? We don't know for sure, but according to like Lovecraft lore, it was the 700s. So that's still, 1,500 years or so.
Rashid to be alive.
Right. Yeah. So it's 3 to 5 times a normal wizard's lifespan. So there's definitely some kind of shenanigans involved.
You wonder if time at the gates.
Holy shit, that would make him older than Mab, possibly.
Well, that's a true story.
It's possible, since you know how little we see to him, how often he doesn't come to much meetings and shit. Like being at the wall.
Yeah, I wonder if the gates.
It's just time dilated away from our reality. The gates. Right. So maybe he has been the gatekeeper since 1990 something, but he's not older physically, or most of the time in his experience than what he is, because time moves at for him the pace it does there.
Right.
God, that would be terrifying. You're fighting a war at a place that time never really changes.
Right. Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me at all that the gates themselves are like outside of time in some weird way. But it's easier to conceptualize it when you just think about it as time zones, right? There's like physical time that he's like, maybe he's 120 years old physically, but he's been alive for 1,500 years because, time zones are weird in the Never Never. So, no, that didn't help. Okay.
I mean, it does. I mean, that's exactly it. We're thinking like what kind of life that he would have had. It's like 1,500 years only, but 120 years of meeting other people.
Right.
So less than 10%.
Well, like every time he shows up, he said, "God damn it! Now I got to buy my albums again because the technology's changed."
Yeah.
He seems way too. He doesn't seem anachronistic enough to.
That is also true.
Been around people, like he seems to be perfectly at comfort with modern society, even if he doesn't show up a lot.
All right. So going on with other things. Cold Case directly had the sleeper, right?
Yes. So the sleeper, to me, it's as direct a reference, but it's still kind of open potentially. So I
thought that was a clear-cut one.
Yeah,
but I don't know that much not
because they haven't said the words Cthulhu, like other than him joking about shouldn't you say Cthulhu Fhtagn or something like that. That's why I say it's not a clear reference, because the other ones he literally says the name, or he makes some direct reference, like the mother of 1,000 young and whatever. But with the sleeper, I think that was one of those, like, if I don't call it Cthulhu, then nobody will see it coming, or only the clever ones will, or I don't know what the thing is there, unless he was worried that like, because Ramirez talks about it, right? It's a sleeper cult. Maybe he's worried that by saying the name, it draws the attention, because that's a thing in magical power as well. But between both the sleeper, the fact that it's an old one asleep somewhere in the Pacific, and Relay, where Cthulhu lies, lies dreaming, but it's, anyway, I could recite the poem almost, but the whole, like, he's dead, but kind of not really. And he's kind of outside of time himself, but
Relay is in the
Pacific. So say that again, Andreas.
How does he end up like sleeping or semi-dead or dreaming in the ocean?
Because
why is he not outside?
Because the stars aren't right. That's, I mean,
but should he
be
outside?
Cthulhu is the sleeper, right?
Yeah, in theory.
Okay, well, that city Relay that he's supposed to be in is described as being in the South Pacific, and Cold Case happened in Antarctica. Not Antarctica, Alaska, the other one. I'm very on top of Antarctica right now.
Yeah, but they specifically, he talks about the sleeper being in the Pacific, so
I mean, I guess it's the same ocean, but it is different hemispheres.
And that's just where the cult was, and I think the cult was there because they were isolated. So let's see. Yeah, I mean, the wiki just says pretty much what I said. You know, the sleeper is a Lovecraftian monster asleep under the waters of the Pacific. So yeah, it could be, you know, maybe the locations changed, but that was enough overlap for me that it's like, okay, wait, so Cthulhu, the sleeping old one in the Pacific, the sleeper is in the Pacific. That's enough overlap for me. But that, in the fact that I like the church name, I can't even remember it now. So
Holy Ascension of Our Lord Cathedral.
Yes, right. Because like just say cathedral fast enough, and I just hear the same phonetics in there. You know, Cthulhu, cathedral. Like
that's on purpose. That is on purpose.
Right. Like it's almost, it's like the Venn diagram where the sleeper and Cthulhu are like 90% overlap. So if it's not the sleeper, like if the sleeper is not Cthulhu, I will be very surprised. But that's part of why I say that one's mostly, you know, he just hasn't come out and said it directly. So.
Okay, so it's kind of more of the conspiracy side. What's kind of related to Cold Case to me is that in Skin Game, Molly says that it's going to take her a couple of days to get to Chicago because she's under a mile of ice. The hell was she doing under a mile of ice, and where would that have been?
Right. Well, and what's irritating to me is that I had gotten the impression that Cold Case was going to answer that question, but it didn't seem to, at least not directly enough, you know.
But, I mean, where is there enough ice for there to be a mile of it that can be above you? Because I can only think of Antarctica, and not having read At the Mountains of Madness is like, don't go there. Don't go see penguins.
Well, pretty much anything deep down is never good.
Right.
Don't do it.
Well, and that's
the Mountain of Madness goes up, surely it's a mountain.
Well, there's mountains, went underneath, and that's when the things like started dying.
Right. And being eaten and disappearing and going crazy, and
albino eyeless penguins running around.
And those cyclopean ruins with their non-Euclidean geometry, and you're welcome. So yeah, I mean, because that under a mile ice kind of ties into potentially that mysterious wizard from, I think it's Summer Night, right, where he's glacier sitting, and so that's or he's like babysitting an iceberg, or what did they call it, something along those lines, but that kind of ties into it, and it makes me think maybe Demon Reach isn't the only such well, right? You know, that there are other things, like wherever the sleeper is, maybe that's about as bad as the well that is under Demon Reach in its own right, and maybe this glacier ties into it in some way, or it's yet an even other place like that where it's like, why does he need to babysit this? Why is there a wizard?
Slumbering old god is a ley line confluence,
right? You know, like that doesn't seem like a stretch at all to me for that sort of thing, but we don't have it said verbatim, right? Like that's where it gets to be that conspiracy. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just a big Yeti, maybe it's a Wendigo or something, you know, or
that the Winter Lady would have trouble with.
I want there to be Migo out there because the Migo would be a fantastic creepy addition, but I doubt it.
So weird.
Yeah, exactly. Like, imagine Dresden. Like, really though, it kind of goes into the Fomor, right? Like all of the weird, crazy shit could just wind up in the pot with the Fomor, because the Fomor, you know, even in legend, they were bred and inspired and created by the gods of chaos, which is not a stretch to say those same gods of chaos are the great old ones. And it's not a stretch to say that the creepy fuckers that we've seen in Aftermath and Bombshells and everything like that are basically deep ones, even though it's not explicitly said. You know, that there's, again, a Venn diagram. They could be Sahuagin, kind of like D&D. They could be deep ones. It could all be the same. You know, that sort of thing. And maybe the Migo are just another variation of that we haven't seen, or it's another name they go by in the Dresden verse. But what's your thought? I see it.
Fomor and Shoggoth and ectoplasm from the Never Never. The Shoggoth are described as being able to grow limbs. The Fomor are having limbs transplanted onto them, usually, but you know, they could be similar origin, or you know, it's like an inside way of doing what the outside Shoggoths did. And
maybe. I don't follow that entirely, because in Warcry, spoilers, and I'm sorry for you guys, they literally fight a Shoggoth, and a Shoggoth is an outsider. Like, he's straight up an outsider. Like, so basically, I think we also see it, though I don't think it's directly named in Cold Days. So when he's at the gates and he sees that crazy horror thing, like just mowing down armies, I see a Shoggoth because of what he saw in Warcry. And so, like, to me, it's something in that ballpark, right? And so, yes, maybe they are using some kind of the same magic or some kinds of the same biology, for lack of a better descriptor, with the Fomor, and that's kind of how that's working. But the Shoggoths themselves, even in the Dresden Files, appear to be outsiders.
Do they still appear to be blobs of jelly?
Yes. So yeah, Shoggoths, gibbering mouthers from D&D, and you know, Shoggoths again in the Dresden Files. Like, it's a direct lift. The main thing is that in the Dresden Files, it just seemed to be like a war machine instead of like a builder, as it is in At the Mountains of Madness. And you know, it just seemed to be like hell bent on destroying everything. You know, kind of like I don't know if this is me filling in the gaps, but like one of their foot soldiers, which just makes that even fucking crazier than anything. You know, that they've got these huge monstrosities as their front line, you know. So
transplanting limbs.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Yeah, what was that?
What flavor jelly?
Yeah, ochre.
Ooh. Oh, God. I mean ochre.
Yeah. Maybe tapioca. I don't know. Yeah.
It seems like a thing of transplanting limbs or growing limbs on foot soldiers. Whether the Fomor are connected to outsiders or Lovecraft or not, it seems too much of a reference to Lovecraft.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the joys of the Dresden Files for me in a way, is that all of the fantasy is real, and seeing where it's in their own little bubbles or where it overlaps, you know, that can be kind of fun as well. You know, because the Fomor, I mean, so for instance, the Fomor have the ice giants, even though there's no real direct connection to those two things in our mythology. So the Fomor contain all of the defeated giants and outcasts and everything from mythology, but are they also, you know, because they're, you know, empowered, created by, inspired by the old ones, how much of an overlap is there, or is it incidental, you know? And because it hasn't explicitly been said, to me, you know, the shape of the multiverse there is that, you know, the Fomor and the Circle, you know, aka the Black Council, are in league with / being powered up by the outsiders, and that's their local, you know, power base, and we just haven't seen that yet. You know, we just haven't fully seen the extent of it in the Dresden Files. The only thing is, like, we've only got so many books left to bring that much mythos in here and have Dresden deal with it, you know. But like the Octacongs, for example, like, what the fuck are those things, and where do they fit in? You know, were they kind of like elder things, or are they just their own thing and mishmashed together and whatever? So there's just a lot.
The reason that everything has to end with Lovecraft in terms of BAT and all of that stuff It's just because all of the bad guys that throughout history apparently went down to the water, and that's where all of the old ones, deep ones, whatever you call them, went to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, many places. So, like in Lovecraft, they all come from various worlds and crazy shit too. Like that's the thing where I'm like, okay, he might not do the local cosmology as it exists in Lovecraft, because you've got Yugoth, which is basically Pluto, and you've got Yeth and Zoth and these other planets. I did a Cthulhu escape room this weekend, so that's why I've got some of these names.
Oh, nice.
So that just happened to overlap. But, you know, like Lovecraft has their own cosmology, and sometimes it's in the local system, and sometimes it's like another dimension.
The outside seems specifically separate.
Right.
It was really weird when reading his description of what, like, okay, so they're the elder ones that had the city in Antarctica at the Mountains of Madness, and then there was the Cthulhu people came later, and they were from a far different place. It's like the elder ones were somehow from a closer place.
Right. Like the Chthonians, I think, was that the word, or they just had some other bastardization of Cthulhu, I thought, you know, the same kind of root. But yeah, I know it's kind of interesting because, you know, the elder things, in summary, they had an empire that basically spanned most of Earth, and they had also come from somewhere else, but it seemed like they focused on Earth. They made the Shoggoths to kind of be their workforce and their laborers. The Shoggoths rebelled, but didn't they get like turned by these Chthonians or whatever? So
yeah, they got like reconciled in some ways. All of the rebellious ones were eradicated, and then they basically moved from controlling them through mind control into actual verbal speech for some reason.
Right.
But then the Shoggoths were still considered very terrible. They still necessary, but they had to be careful. And the Cthulhu people were running around taking over half of the planet, and the Migos had Tibet.
Oh yeah,
there are multiple different god pantheons, kind of.
And then there was a city not far away from the one that they were at in Antarctica. Like, that one's even more evil. We won't even write it down.
Right.
I think there's the elder gods, the outer gods, the great old ones that all fell into different ruling categories, and none of them got along.
Yeah, and then eventually the elder ones went very deep
the
underground.
The elder gods went away. The great old ones usurped them. The outer gods usurped them. One of them, Cthulhu's an outer god? Lovecraft gets confusing.
Yeah. Insanity. So, I mean, it helps where, I mean, the description of, is he just some crazy dude who likes his adjectives? Like, really, that's what Cthulhu is, right? Like, what are all the terrible, crazy, nightmare-inducing adjectives we can throw at it? We'll do that.
Tentacles.
And somehow, yes, right. Because the scariest thing I can think of are tentacles, but if you think about it, like, he really was kind of in
the Japanese.
Yeah, he was in a golden age of, nightmare fuel in a way, right? Like, they were starting to figure out what was under the pyramids. They were starting to explore space a little bit more. There were still deep, dark jungles, whereas, like, today we've checked under all of the beds and in all of the closets, and we found no crazy monsters that we're aware of,
Like,
so
it capitalized on an age of curiosity that hadn't been tempered by knowledge yet.
Yes.
So everyone was interested in what was going on, but we didn't quite know it. So if you go back and you read Cthulhu and Lovecraft, you get the point, but it's no longer as scary because the boogeyman in the closet doesn't exist anymore.
Right. And it was fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And he populated that with nightmare fuel. So at least for his time.
Yeah. We've gone there now, but it's still terrifying, but not on the same impact.
Right. I mean, the quote is captured by, if you're not afraid of Lovecraft, you just don't understand it well enough, which is probably good because that's also a double-edged sword, because you'll also be a little nuts. I'm totally sane, by the way, so we're all fine.
Totally.
Though we talked about this earlier, Dresden definitely touches on that whole idea of maybe you don't want to know more than you need to know.
Right.
Sometimes he gets his friends hurt by not telling them enough, but he judges it not worth telling them because if they know, then they're in danger.
at least early on. Later on, he gives them the choice, and that's the main difference.
His friends get hurt, and he realizes he's not actually helping them.
So with Dresden, through experience, he realizes that information is power, and he gives that power to his friends so that they can be safer. Versus with Lovecraft, it's like information is insanity.
Well, and there's definitely, Dresden lives in a bubble, right? Because we talk about that with the site. Like, so Dresden lives in an odd place, especially for the Cthulhu mythos. We were talking before the show a little bit about how, like, if Dresden was straight up in Lovecraft's works, he would have been gibbering by, book 1 or 2 potentially, but certainly he would have been by Cold Days, because he what he saw with Shagnasty, he's seen 2 walkers. But in the Dresden files, in the Dresden verse themselves, it seems like that only happens if you see it with the sight. Whereas in Lovecraft, just kind of knowing about it starts to impact your sanity.
As soon as He Who Walks Behind showed up at the convenience store.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like that would have been, if by some miracle he didn't go nuts then, he certainly would have gone nuts very shortly thereafter, with some of the other stuff he saw. Like the hags, like let's go chronologically and involve the comics because everybody loves that. But with the Hecate and hags, that would have been another, like, right in the sanity, just chow. So
I like it. Right in the sanity, karate chop.
The sanity is almost a game mechanic in Lovecraft.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like Bloodborne.
I think sanity actually is a game mechanic in the Lovecraft
Arkham
RPG.
The Arkham Horror, it definitely is. You trade sanity to close portals or something. I've only played it once.
Well, I find it interesting that maybe not directly Lovecraftian, he does kind of use the same mechanism with times that Harry is seeing something that he can't really comprehend. So, like, at the outer gates, he couldn't actually see what the real landscape was. He was seeing something that his mind could interpret. And the same thing when he was a ghost. It's like he's inside Bob's skull. It's like, you're not seeing the real thing, but that's okay. It's same mechanism, but different weight.
Right. Well, and you get a more benign, in Cold Days with the whole, like, he's dumbing it down for me and I'm dumbing it down for you. So
it comes down to the whole premise of Dresden, where plain vanilla mortals tend to write off anything supernatural as a gas leak or a terrorist attack. We don't want to admit what's going on, and we're happy to hand wave it away.
Until peace talks.
Yeah. But even like Dresden does that to an extent, even though he's clued in.
And part of that it's the human mind, right? Like we could go on with like Mark Twain, right? Mark Twain kind of butts into it a little bit. He's the one with the whole, like, there's no phenomenon so weird and so crazy that you won't find some group of humans worshiping it somewhere. Like, it's just how you kind of rationalize it. And I think part of Dresden's thing is, like, for crying out loud, look at the 7 laws, thou shalt not reach beyond the outer gates. So of course he visualizes them as gates and a castle wall and whatever, because that's how his mental landscape works as well. When he's fighting the outsider, is that he puts up a wall of sanity, and so everything for him is these immutable objects and strong, foundations and battlements and whatever. Whereas, like, what would it really look like? And it's just one of those things. I don't think you can describe it, right? Like, it'd be interesting to see it from, like, Mab's perspective, or, how does that even work? But yeah, it's just kind of interesting.
I want to know what Rashid's false eye sees.
Right.
Everything.
You don't, because then you'll go nuts. So
he hasn't. Oh, maybe it's false because of that. Like, it's false as a safety mechanism.
Yes, it absorbs the craziness.
Ooh.
Yeah, it distills those wavelengths into, like, I honestly
kind of assumed it did that.
Right. It's I imagine it's both a sensor and, like, it normalizes that, kind of like the black staff, protects Ebenezer from dark magic, that, Rashid is able to look on outsiders without going nuts, So
I imagine he's looking at them. I wonder if that's actually what's going on. He's looking at them with the sight and filtering it through the eye.
Probably.
At the same time, you kind of get the hint from Turncoat that the eye has something to do with his understanding of time, because he closed the real eye and he started looking around with the false one. It's like, oh, you did bad things with the island.
Right. Well, but that kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier about him taking a look at Shagnasty, right? Like, it doesn't make sense that Shagnasty by himself would be so terrifying and so crazy, even though that's Lovecraftian, right? That he's so terrifying and so crazy that just by looking at him, you would go nuts. But with the Dresden Files, when you use the sight, you're not just seeing things as they are, you're seeing them as they were and as they will be. So when he looked at Shagnasty, he saw 10 trillion nightmares, that basically he saw everything all at once. And, you know, I don't think it took him hours to process that. You know?
Had he ever looked on an entity like Shagnasty?
Like a nightmare entity?
That was like
nothing on that scale.
Like he's never looked at anything that scale before.
Not on that scale.
Closest thing, though, that wasn't evil, was the Queens, I guess.
Well, I was going to say the Queens definitely had more than that power, but they weren't necessarily pure nightmare fuel like he was. But didn't he also, he at least saw the spell and some things that Kravos as the nightmare did, but I don't know if he saw the nightmare. He almost looked at an archangel, or at least an angel in Ghost Story. Of course, I guess that's after, you know, so.
Yeah, I just love the archangel saying no.
Yeah, just... Right, here's a whole bunch of nope.
Even Dresden sometimes overestimates his abilities.
Oh, he's just fucking an idiot. He had no idea. He's like, ooh, what does this button do? And it's like, oh, God, no, not that button.
For all his talk about caution and whatnot, he sometimes maybe don't do that.
Well, and that's what's funny. It's like, so we're in fucking Ghost Story, and how many times does he have to get bitten by the sight? And to the point where he even mirrors Rashid's ointment a lot so that he can deal with fairies without actually having to use his sight. And he makes a big deal about it, I think, in Proven Guilty, where it's like it's part of his wizardly battle gear now. Like when he gets all his wizardly stuff, he gets his ointment so he doesn't have to use the sight because he's paid for that too many times. But I'm a ghost, better just start using the sight everywhere, you know. So
but even,
I'm already dead. What more can it hurt me?
Right.
Stormfront, or at least the first three, he's talking about you don't ever want to look someone in the eyes because you don't want to soul gaze if you don't have to, and you don't want to use your sight if you don't have to.
Better
like
use
he already knows when the series starts that the sight is something you got to be careful with.
Right. He's an idiot. Yeah. Because like I kind of liked how in Blood Rights, right? Like he accidentally uses the sight on Murphy and Kincaid, right? Because he's looking at the Renfields potentially, and then gets knocked over and like does the whole Cyclops thing, but instead of being destructive, he just kind of like, oh God, I can see everything, and I see you two guys, right? I'm remembering it from Blood Rights specifically. Like that's when he sees Kincaid come in as like the big, not quite
the whole thing. Mavra thing was death masks.
No,
he didn't see Mavra with her.
Oh, the book was Polaroids on Murphy was later, right?
Yeah, that's Blood Rights.
Yeah.
So, or wait, no, that's the
Polaroid
is Deadbeat, the next one. Yeah.
Okay.
So that one's the Polaroids because that's the genesis for getting him in the game with Mavra and the Word and all that jazz. So yeah,
the whole. Even the Word of Kemmler is vaguely Lovecraftian. Anything to do with knowledge and power.
At that point.
Yeah, it definitely has that feel, and maybe that's just all occult. You know, it's all occult learnings, and it fits the same kind of themes and whatever. But
Lovecraft kind of does define the entirety of the occult scene to an extent,
right? So some near misses then. One of the ones that I'm still looking for all the connections, and maybe we just don't know enough in the Dresden File, is that I added Nemesis to this list because Nemesis is clearly playing for Team Outsider, but I have found out, a few months ago that Lovecraft also has a poem called Nemesis. And so if you go read the poem, it's literally just mostly this guy is gibbering in the dark, or at least I presume it's a guy, but you know,
it's very
language is very old,
but it connects. I was surprised at how fitting it does seem if you were to describe Nemesis.
Right, how well it fits, and that's the thing. It's like this. It may be strong enough that you could just say like, okay, now read this as though you were Nemesis, and it's like, oh shit, you know, because there's a lot of things like, you know, talking about all the different crazy worlds they've explored and all the people they've subjugated and things like that, you know, because I was reading it a little bit before the show, and it's very thick to me. Like, it's very hard for me to get through it. But
some of these verbs he's using here: scanned, peered, haunted.
Right.
Especially scanned in relation to Rashid and scanning for Nemesis.
Right.
Seems a little strange. It does seem all about witnessing things.
Right. That's, yeah. And just, yeah, like a lot of this, I mean, is this all the Never Never? Is it untold other, you know, other worlds and dimensions? Like, you know, because in Lovecraft lore, that's all other worlds, you know, and everything like that. But
have you guys read the Dream Cycle at all?
No.
The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadeth and a few others. He goes on one long, crazy journey.
Right.
God knows what's going on.
Right.
The last stanza of the Nemesis reminds me more of Rashid than anything.
Through the ghoul-guarded gateways.
I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to badness with fright.
Even like the past the on-mood abysses of night. What domain is night?
Air and darkness. Mab.
Winter. And who guards the gates?
Right.
Yeah, see, that really...
It really fits really well.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe we're really analyzing this in a point of view that wants it to fit, but it seems to fit pretty well.
And that's kind of my thing too, and why I hedge so much is because, you know, like I kind of want it to be a thing, but I kind of also don't want it to be a thing at some points, right? Like, we know from Word of Jim that there's going to be a kaiju book, and it's like, I really hope that it's not just Cthulhu, but that's a possibility, right? Like, how many kaiju could be out there in the Dresden verse? You know, we've got, like, that we know of anyway, like certainly all of them. There could be some Fomorian creature. We know he's still supposed to deal with the dragons at some point in theory. You know, Cthulhu's on that scale. But if we're dealing with them in book like 19, for example, because, you know, we're pretty sure, so it's 16 is mirror mirror, 17 is supposed to be heel turn, you know, but the wrestling one,
mirror mirror.
Yeah, so we've got like 18 and 19 that, you know, are sufficiently far out there. So one of those is probably the kaiju book, and it's like, holy crap, you know.
What is kaiju?
The giant
Godzilla.
monsters, Pacific Rim, you know.
All right.
So, and like, it's just one of those things where it's like, unless we've got to completely stretch what we know of Dresden, like, I would not pit Dresden against any of the giant monsters that I can think of. Like, you know, certainly not Solo. So,
before.
Fighting the kaiju, he gets a USS aircraft carrier.
Oh, yeah.
And somehow he doesn't destroy it just by breathing at it.
He's far enough away from every individual piece of technology that he's probably not going to affect the whole thing.
He's up on the deck, so, you know, don't try and land anything, but...
I mean, in past...
He can stand on the very tip, but they still have guns.
It takes a little bit of time for him to affect things. Unless he's trying.
Well, and at that point, it's probably... You know, it's probably like he's just riding a tsunami or something like that into it. You know, it's mostly a projectile, I would imagine. So,
especially just having finished Aftermath, it's funny to like picture when you read a standard Dresden Files novel. Dresden goes into it by the hair of his teeth every time and struggles to get by. When you stop and look at what happened, the fuck just happened? He goes in guns blazing and just drags the entire world with him.
Yeah.
So please don't give him an aircraft carrier, because that would just be so bad.
What they say too, like with Dresden, how people view, how the council views him, how the younger people, it's like they don't know that was by the skin of his teeth. He just looks scary, like, because they don't know that he wasn't, like, didn't have it in the bag.
Still, my favorite part of Ghost Story is when Molly tells him, "You don't understand how much you do."
I have a question.
Okay.
In Aftermath, like, you see basically how Georgia was affected by the Night of Bad Dreams and how everything just went to shit after that. Is the Night of Bad Dreams in any way related with Lovecraft at all? Because, like, I don't understand how that happened in any way. It doesn't seem connected to the curse or the death of the
psychic phenomenon. Is definitely a Lovecraft thing.
And the fact that it was targeted to pregnant women and new mothers.
Targeted?
It was targeted to pregnant women and new mothers.
They just got it worse, right?
Well, yes, it was significantly worse. So it was kind of targeted.
But is it significantly worse because it was targeting them, or just because the human psyche is more vulnerable at that time period?
Are you saying women are more vulnerable?
I would.
Alex, can we get Alex in here? Alex, identifying women. Alex,
sensitive is the word that you're looking for. They're more sensitive. So
I wouldn't say. I mean, maybe vulnerable is not the right word, but it's not something that is inherent. But
it always seemed to be connected to Susan and Maggie.
I'm surprised Harry wasn't more affected, seeing as he was pregnant too.
Yeah, but that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was gonna say the timing didn't fit, but it totally would have, right?
He was still pregnant.
Yeah.
He just had a very, very long pregnancy.
Right. And he kind of died in the middle of it and then came back, and yeah.
Except there was the baby that was keeping the parent alive.
That happens sometimes.
Fuck, Kristen.
Right. So, FYI, the aircraft carrier thing has been referenced since 2011. I found a reference in the Word of Jim, so that's another ancient long con, and he seems to imply in this one that it's going to be in the BAT. So we'll see. But and that's the thing too, is like I feel like there's so much stacked up in the BAT. Like he says they're going to be like double length books, but holy God, like
Kristen Files books are pretty short for.
They're getting longer.
They are getting.
They're getting.
Skin Game wasn't particularly.
Skin Game was twice the size of Stormfront.
Yeah, it was like 50 short chapters.
Tiny little book.
Yeah.
So Dresden is starting to push on the feel of epic fantasy. He's not there yet.
Sure.
But if we ended with 3 epic fantasy books, he could cover it.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that.
But that's quite a lot. I mean, 3 times as many words, pretty much.
Right.
So, do you describe epic fantasy as being by word count?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much.
Fantasy argument.
Epic fantasy pretty much entirely describes scope.
We just wound up in a high fantasy episode. Did you feel that?
I feel like I've been taken to an alternate dimension.
Another dimension?
Are we gonna talk about prose?
We might talk about Sanderson.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just finished another Sanderson series. I'm ahead of you now in Star Wars.
Sanderson and Dresden, the two, easiest to go to high fantasy topics.
I can't believe you've never read historic materials, by the way.
I know.
I haven't, but I just thought you would have. That's like a thing I thought would have happened.
One of those series that I've never, to surprise you even more, I've never read any of the Narnia books.
I've seen the movies. That
wasn't on my list.
I think I read the first one.
Just never made it to my list. That were very off topic.
That happens. But we are kind of at an hour. So do we have any last minute things that we want to add in?
I was sad that I didn't get to bring up Todash Space. I just didn't find a way where I could work that in. But
episode 2,
because we were
talking about that in episode 2. We're Todash Space and beyond.
we were talking about potentially talking about the cosmology and how that ties into it and everything. So we talked about how the Lovecraft stuff, as far as I know, doesn't fit in directly, but I guess that'll be our part 2 episode, is cosmology and the outside and whatever. But it's out there.
Project our opinions on what might happen.
Yeah,
that's always fun.
Go for it, because you seem to be on a similar wavelength with me. So
not this episode.
Not this episode. Another one. You're like, I'm gonna need like half an hour. It's gonna take me a minute.
Sit back and figure out all my opinions here. Yeah, that would take a while.
Okay, so part 2, you get to look forward to all of that. Plug
Yay.
the stuff.
All right, so part 2 is the cosmology and or maybe the where we think this is all going to tie in, huh?
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Good.
All right. Fun
wherever it
times.
takes us.
And if you want to continue the argument of what is epic fantasy, check out High Fantasy.
How about urban fantasy? What is urban fantasy? What is the
Also continuing argument. We've had that argument before, even.
Yeah, I've heard people say urban fantasy needs to be in the modern world, or it just needs to be in a city.
I think it's just a city, because then
that's
like
my opinion too.
I think it has to be in a modern world.
You guys
I don't
are
think
ridiculous.
Mistborn is urban.
I was like, how could you argue about
fantasy.
urban fantasy? It's very explicit.
Because you can have old times urban fantasy.
Name
Because
one.
anything Victorian London.
Mistborn, Dishonored as a game is urban fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I think our old time definition needs some work then, because, like, for example, Greyhawk, does Greyhawk count as urban fantasy? Because, you know,
Greyhawk?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a D&D setting, but basically, like, yeah, because mostly it takes place in some cities and some things like that. Like,
you can have high fantasy, urban fantasy. The thing is that it needs to be really connected to the city.
No.
I don't know any high fantasy.
Apparently, the Vlad Tolstoy books generally count.
I was going to say epic urban fantasy. I'm not really sure I'm familiar with anything. Tolstoy, I could definitely see as having some of that.
And those two terms are theoretically mutually exclusive, because part of the whole epic / high fantasy is the fact that it's the world.
Yeah.
You know, like the whole shebang.
Therefore, maybe epic is not the correct term for length of book.
Maybe it's the other epic, you know, with the
so
OCH. Yeah. Okay. So should we plug our stuff and get out of here before we like fight for another hour? Okay. So other podcasts that you might be interested in that we also do, Dangerous to Go Alone. It's a podcast about nerd and geek culture, as opposed to this one, which is just nerds and geeks talking about the Dresden Files. You've got the Great Scott podcast, which is a podcast about The Office. And then you've got High Fantasy, where you can argue pedantic topics like urban fantasy and epic fantasy, and if they could be the same thing.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I'm just shooting now. I'm just broadside. Did you see that? Just.
Oh no!
We held up next to you and just sat there waiting.
I'm trying to recruit people on the network to do a D&D game with me. We'll do as a podcast. So if you want to see that, shout out in the comments. I've only got one guy interested so far.
So Geek and Sundry.
But quick roll? No, we're nowhere near as good as that.
No, but I mean,
yet
we can't all be awesome
Okay.
with them. But
well, if you want to see that, leave a comment. I guess that because we're taking votes apparently.
No, it's just like I can use it as
how the internet works now.
I can use it as peer pressure. I'm like, look at all these people.
Peer pressure is bad. High school told me so.
Let's look at all these people who want to see it. Like, let's do it. Come on, guys.
Our hashtag to reach out and get the 411 on the. No, I got nothing. I'm not cool enough to have this conversation.
Okay, I'm ending the podcast now. Say bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.